You're listening to the Fan2Fan Podcast, and on this episode, we are talking to Scott Peterson about creating Halloween haunts. Here we go. Welcome to the Fan2Fan Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Bernie Gonzalez, and on this episode, fellow co-host Pete Charbonneau and I are talking to Scott Peterson. Scott is an Emmy award-winning writer and producer, and we're digging into his creation of Halloween haunts. That's right, the man loves scaring people, and he has a garage and various storage containers full of Halloween decorations to prove it. And on top of all that, Scott was actually born on Halloween. A little bit about Scott. He's worked as an animator, visual effects artist on movies, including Jingle All the Way, Terminator 2, Die Hard 2, Batman Returns. He's worked on animated productions, including Phineas and Ferb and Last Kids on Earth. Folks can find out more information about Scott and his work at his website, flagrantproductions.net. And now let's get to Scott. You worked in visual effects for Jingle All the Way, Terminator 2, Die Hard, Batman Returns. Did not work on The Relic as we thought you may have, but you may have worked with the people who were working on The Relic.
I did.
That's closer than Pete and I have been, but we were talking about your early exploits with The Blob, the Ken Russell movie, and in that conversation you shared how, with your birthday being Halloween, you've also been a part in creating Halloween haunts, and we've got to get you back on the show to talk about this, so please share with us a little bit about your birth date and then also Halloween haunts, their creation, why you got into them.
Yeah, birthday is October 31st. Mother's maiden name. Oh, no, wait, I won't. But yeah, I was always a Halloween baby. And, every birthday had to decide, well, am I going to have cake or am I going to have Halloween candy? I can't have both. And usually would have a Halloween cake in the shape of a pumpkin or something like that. And so I think I may have resented it a little bit as a kid, but quickly realized, no, this is the most fun holiday of the year, and it's mine. I have special ownership over it.
Were your birthdays collapsed with like trick-or-treating events?
Yeah, it was always like, well, nobody's going to come to my birthday because everybody's out trick-or-treating. So You never got to celebrate your birthday on your birthday. And like I said, you can't gorge a bunch of cake and a bunch of candy. So very quickly, I decided my birthday was a lesser holiday to Halloween. And Halloween is the big daddy.
I'm just assuming you're comfortable talking about this thanks to many hours logged with your therapist, that you've already gone through all of the trauma. So we're grateful.
Yes.
So thank you.
Move past that. And like we've talked about before, I got into the horror stuff probably around junior high school when I started watching Abbott and Costello and all those kind of things, and then got into the deeper and deeper stuff, but didn't really start doing like haunting my house, doing yard haunts and things until I was probably like 30. I mean, I was old. Most people start in their teens or 20s, and I started pretty late and just doing the decorations in front. And after a certain number of years, my wife and the wife of another guy down the street got tired of us because he was building stuff in his front yard. I was building stuff in my front yard. She's like, why don't you two get together and go build somewhere else? and that's really what happened.
Okay.
We got together and started doing haunts here in South Pasadena that were technically not professional haunts because we didn't make money off of them. We donated everything to charity that we made, but we did 3 years running. In 2013, we did something called Theater of Terror about this director who used this theater that he owned to create these horrible play-based torture things for people who came through. So he tortured his cast and he tortured his audience, and then they're all kind of themed like plays and musicals that you might have seen. The next year, 2014, we were in the same venue, which was this theater, but it's a theater that used to be a mortuary. So we went back to the history of that Raymond Hill Mortuary, and supposedly dealt with the real history of this building. And a guy who was running the mortuary, but he was stealing things out of the coffins, like grave robbing and mistreating the bodies. And then, of course, all the spirits come back because they're pissed. And our final year was 2015. We lost that space and ended up in a huge parking lot. So we had to build, I think it was like 25 rooms in a parking lot. And we did Ward 13, which was the crazy asylum. And that was probably our most popular. I think we donated like $30,000 or $40,000 to the schools from the number of people that we got to go through. And we were only charging like $25 a person. We just had lines of people. We'd run for like 8 nights in October, Fridays and Saturdays. And it was an amazing experience. And we got local kids involved and the community involved. And the city was so happy with this community event that they gave us like a plaque, like, you're a friend of the city, or I don't remember what it said. But I was like, no, we're just trying to scare the little kids. And they're like, Alex, this is good. You're doing a good thing.
How this is not a movie in the venue of like The Burbs, I don't know, because one, your title, 8 Nights in October, like you got to go with that. Like that's that's great. The two dueling neighbors who just keep escalating their Halloween hunt decoration, and then a third neighbor comes in. It turns out like they're actually like a universal monster, and all their stuff is just like real, and then hilarity ensues. I think all right. So I got to go back here, Scott, because how do you go from accumulating stuff for your own place to getting pawned off to a neighbor to build stuff? Like every time Halloween came, did you just kind of ramp it up year to year?
Yeah. And starting, you start with a yard display, and then you have somebody jump out at somebody, or you find some things you can trigger with a switch or a light. And then you're like, oh, well, I'm going to build a tunnel. I'm going to have them go down the driveway. And then pretty soon you've got this whole, thing around your house and down the driveway. I did one year where the kids came in the front, and our house goes all the way down a hill and kind of out onto another street. So I had the exit on another street. So the parents would let their kids come in, and they'd never come out. And up, down, a block away. It didn't know where to go. Now that may not be moral or good, but it was really funny.
But it's fun.
And so, it was the hardest part of going from doing it in your own home to doing it someplace else is finding a location.
Sure.
That's really the hard part. You've got to not only be able to rent the place and get insurance for the place, but you've got to find somebody that will guarantee you, yes, you can have it for 6 weeks in September, October, and they'll guarantee it back in January when you start planning. Because most places, well, if it's January, they want to rent it to somebody now. They're not going to say, oh yeah, we'll hold it for you. But if you can find a place like that, that's why the theater worked out so well for us. They're used to booking events. So yeah, we have somebody in there March, April, and we have somebody in there. So we're like, oh, we'll take September, October. And that worked really well for us for 2 years, and we're very lucky to be there.
So you're building all this stuff in your house. In your 2-car garage is like the one space now just dedicated to like a fort worth of Tupperware containers filled with stuff. Because that's what I'm picturing, either your basement, a shed, or a garage, a labyrinthian maze, declarations that every year you start with 2 or 3 Tupperwares, and then next year you have 5, and then the next year you have 15.
The 3 walls of our 2-car garage and the attic space above it are all Halloween stuff. And then I had to start buying those Home Depot plastic houses. It's like 10 by 10.
Sure.
And so I have a couple of those, just again, floor to ceiling crap. And the problem at this point is like, is it worth digging through all that to find that one particular skeleton, or should I just go buy it? At this point, it just saved me time to go down to Spirit and get another skeleton.
Sure, because you can never have too many skeletons, right?
You really can't.
Now, were you taking part on like when you would do like the lawn, get-ups? Were you like in like cloak and stuff, like kind of roaming the front yard?
You said person jumping out and scaring.
Yes, through the jumping out.
It's any chance I can, I will. The problem with running something is a lot of times you have to be going around making sure, oh shoot, the sound turned off over here, the light's not working here, there's a kid crying over there. So you kind of have to be a production manager. But any chance I got to throw the hood on and jump out, then it's like, if you guys have never done it, it's an adrenaline rush to leap out and make somebody scream.
This is exactly why we wanted to have you on, because the fact that you're talking about it as in a production, that you have to run things, this was a big deal for you.
It is. And again, it's just, I think we were talking about this before the podcast, that I need to get a hobby, something that doesn't lend to, oh, I'm going to write a script about this, or I'm going to tell a story about this, or I'm going to get a job. And I think the closest thing to that is haunts. I don't know how they help anybody, but it's like an itch that you have to scratch.
In some ways, you were talking about this with Josh, about giving yourself permission to have a hobby that's not related to your day job. Because I have to imagine at some point you're kind of doing the creative calculus, right? In your day job, you're doing effects, you're doing writing, you're producing, you're working on productions as part of a team. And then you get to go home, and I'm sure there's the part of you that's like, yeah, I'm working on my stuff. But then when maybe something opens up like this that has nothing to do with creativity, but 100% does, you're like, well, does this help me become a better artist or writer? It's like, no, I just want to do this, and I'm going to give myself permission to do this.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think for a while I tried to rationalize it as, oh no, it's still entertainment. It's live theater. It's not, no, we're just having fun. And it's, I think you have to do that. You have to do some things in life that are just because you enjoy them. And it's not that it's like play. It's a lot of work. It's a production, but I think it's using a different part of the brain. Like something about me, I'm not good at woodworking or hammering or building things, but I love doing it because it's so different than trying to figure out a script or a story. It's very physical. It's very nothing there. And an hour later, oh my God, we've got the frame of a room. And it's like, this wasn't here before. Now I can walk in it. I can come out of it. I have this thing about architecture and scares. For me, as soon as a wall is up, I think it's permanent. Like, I'm used to a house, and if it's a wall, it's a wall. So if you cut a hole in that wall and hang a picture over it, suddenly somebody can drop that picture down and come at you through a wall, or you can make someone crawl through an air duct that is actually a tunnel, anything like that, or a wall that swings open like Scooby-Doo style. I love that kind of stuff because it for me, it almost defies physics. It's like, no, that's a wall. That's permanent, but you can mess with people through that, or have a puppet kind of a thing that comes through a hole in the wall and tries to grab you. And it's like, it's unexpected to me.
It's so funny how that wall for you it goes from like structural to a stage.
Yeah.
Like it's a prop now that you can do something with. And then, naturally, like your creativity kicks in and says, all right, well, if there's a hole, then here are different things that hole could be used for.
Oh, no, we're still talking about haunts, right? We haven't got into some sexual thing.
No, not yet. That's the second part of the episode.
Take us through a little bit of like that creative process. So I'm curious now, when you've got like a space like the theater, and that kind of worked into what your theme was looking to be. So that's like a very set space, and you can work with that. But when you're forced to move to the parking lot, are you sketching out like I'm guessing you're coming up with a concept, but are you sketching out like, okay, so this room's going to have this, and we could do this here. Like what was that creative process like for you?
Yeah, it's very much, brainstorming, throwing everything at the wall when you start. Again, usually around January, and then you try we're narrow it down to, okay, I think in that amount of time, with the amount of money we have, we can build 10 rooms, 20 rooms, however. And you start thinking, well, we need a lobby where they come in. We need the padded room where the crazy guy is. We need the operating room where they're going. And you start planning it out, using your graph paper, you're figuring it out, trying to do it with as few walls as possible, just so you're not, again, lumber's so expensive, it's crazy. And figuring out a path that is interesting and kind of confusing so people don't know which way they're going. But yeah, you map it all out. You figure out what your priorities are. If you start out with 20 rooms, when you're done, it's only going to be 12 because you're going to go, oh, we ran out of time on this. Oh, we couldn't make that work. But you hopefully have whatever visual gags or scare gags that you think are the most important. We had this idea for the asylum that there was going to be a part where we weren't going to have anything built in the parking lot. Like we couldn't cover the entire parking lot. So we thought, wouldn't it be fun if when they come into a room, there are 20 wheelchairs there, and each person sits in a wheelchair, and you strap their hands to the wheelchair, and then you take them outside. So suddenly they're not in the confines of this house. They're out in the open. There's people, sliding across the ground at them on those kind of things that you put on your elbows and knees, like metal things you can slide. I don't know if you guys have seen this. Or people, running at you with a shovel and scraping it, making sparks on the ground. And they can't do anything. They literally can't get out of the wheelchair, and you can push them right where you want them. That's one of the things I love about haunts, is when you can force people into the place where you're going to scare them. And that was a really fun thing. So having this whole thing where you come out, and then it brings you back to another indoor portion for like the big finale. But yeah, it's about mapping it all out and figuring out, what kind of gags you want to do in each room. And I don't know if you guys have been to like, Universal Studios or Knott's Berry Farm kind of big amusement park haunts, but one of the things that is kind of a knock against those is a lot of times they'll have the same scare over and over and over and over. Mm-hmm. So in every room you go into, a light comes on and a horn comes on and a guy comes out from behind a curtain. And it's scary in room 1. It's not scary in room 12 because it's like, oh, there's the curtain. Oh, here comes the light. So it's finding a way of mixing it up so that it's different in each room, and there's different kinds of scares and different kinds of experiences is really important too.
Now, in the order of progression, Scott, is it a case where you thought of the gags first, messing around with creativity, thinking, hey, we try this wheelchair trick that in some ways is experiential? Like it's kind of like, hey, we're putting a person in a situation they can't control, but the other part of it is you have complete control because you're kind of putting them on a track. We're like, oh no, we're just going to have you go through a few things. and make you feel like you're out of control. All right, so I can see where like that's a gag. Did you guys think of those things together and then kind of layer on a theme to be like, hey, we've thought up all these gags that kind of feel like they could work in like an asylum Ward 13 thing. It's like, oh, well, let's make it Ward 13. Like this all works now.
A lot of it is necessity based. If you have 800 clown costumes, it's like, well, we pretty much have to do something with clowns. So it's using what you have.
Such a unique problem. Very few people have, Scott.
So a lot of it is it's like making a low budget movie. It's like, okay, we've got a cabin, we've got 3 guys, we've got a weekend. What movie can we make? So, and then you have your list of gags and your list of things, and you see, well, how can we put these together? Oh, this might work if we did a carnival, but that doesn't quite work with the location. What if we did an insane asylum and we change that gag so it's not a Jack in the Box, it's a crazy guy coming out through the cot. You know, he was underneath his cot and he's coming straight out at you. And it's the same Jack in the Box gag, but it's in an asylum.
So there's a lot of use all the Buffalo mentality from year to year. Like we have these many props. How will they work or maybe repurposed or reimagined for this New Year's theme?
Yeah. We don't like repeating in terms of, oh, we'll do the asylum 2 years in a row. That's just not very much fun. But yeah, you definitely, if you've got a good gag, we have one really good like pneumatic animatronic of a lady that is facing away from you, and then she kind of comes at you leaning over backwards, and she comes like 8 feet towards you. We didn't build it. It's just something we bought where we're like, we need one big, really cool finishing thing. But each year we'll dress her up differently. So one year she's a crazy person in the asylum, and one year she's somebody from the theater. We've continued since then doing things in our driveways. And so sometimes we did a clown one where she was a clown, and using the stuff you have in whatever way you think can help tell the story, or even if it doesn't, at least scare some kids.
Now, do you remember the conversation you had with your neighbor, your neighbor's wife, when you decided like, oh, okay, we're going to take this from the yard, from the driveway to a theater? Like what was there something, was like a specific thing that you're like, or was it kind of going back to what you talked about before? Like, this is something that you needed to do?
I think I was lucky that he had been exploring the possibility of going into an actual place like the year before. So he already had some contacts. And so he was like, this could be possible. And if you're, willing to go in on it with me, then I'd feel more confident rather than just going all by myself. But he had already kind of made a contact at the theater. So I was like, oh yeah, there's an opportunity to actually do this in a public place. That's amazing. So I don't think there was much reluctance on either of our parts. It was just like, oh my God, a kindred spirit. Let's do this.
Mm-hmm. And not to get into the details of your accounting here, Scott,
yeah.
But I have to imagine this is probably your props, his props and his stuff. But, you mentioned pneumatics and multiple clown costumes, multiple. I have to imagine like this is your money. This is his money to kind of seed this idea. And then you kind of work within the limitations of that financially. And then you kind of realize, all right, well, what could we do or what could we build to fill in some gaps for things that we'd like to do that we can't afford? Did it kind of work like that?
Yeah, absolutely. And the first year was much more lean. We didn't know if we were going to get our money back or if it was just going to be money down the hole. We ended up doing a little bit better than breaking even, but just barely. The charity we were associated with was not very happy with us because they didn't give very much that first year. But we were able to establish kind of our reputation. And so then the second year we did much better. But yeah, it's a risk, and it's hard for anybody to make the jump from home haunt to professional or whatever you want to call it, at an actual venue. But if you can, it's worth it. I think again, we didn't go because we had a theater and we were able to do something where we framed it as, oh, this is a theater. We didn't have to do huge building type of things because it looked like a theater. Mm-hmm. We didn't pay the actors. We were able to get volunteers. That's probably the next biggest cost is your crew and your actors. So it wasn't as huge an overhead as you might think. It's mainly paying for the menu and all the food. People eat so much when they're there for free.
Remember, you can find the Fan2Fan podcast at www.fanpodcast.com. Facebook, just search Fan2Fan Podcast. That's FAN, the number 2, FAN. On Instagram at Fan2Fan Podcast, or on Twitter at Fan2Fan Podcast. We'd love to hear from you, so send a message and let us know what you think of the show. Thanks.
And now, on with the show.
So as you're getting this off the ground, what kind of like trial and error do you experience? Like, I'm assuming that it's like refining things from year to year. Like, okay, this worked really well, and I know you don't want to repeat necessarily the same scares, but like, okay, well, this type of thing works, as opposed to, so what are some lessons that you learn doing it from year to year?
Probably the most important one is the people that you bring in. That may not be like the first thing you think of. You may think of, oh, you want to use a spring rather than a hydraulic, but no, it's about the people. Especially when you have volunteers and you don't know them all. We had a girl that came in and kept spitting blood at people. And we told her, like, you can't do that. They don't know what this is. They don't know if you're infected. This was before COVID, but still people didn't want to be. And she's like, no, that's my character. And we're like, no, you kind of got to go now. We had another guy. We had this great gag, this amazing gag. And my daughter helped do it. But we'd have a young girl. She was probably 14 at the time. And she would get in line with all the customers as if she was there by herself and her friends didn't join her. So she was a plant. And she'd stand in line with them for a half an hour, get into the hunt. And then at one point, this big guy in a monster costume would grab her and drag her away. And so the people that she's befriended, some old couple who thinks she's by herself are like, oh my God. And they get out and they come to the front. There was a girl with us and she got grabbed and they took her away, and they completely bought it. And then she gets in line and does it again with the next. And the reason I'm going back to your question is, we had a guy once that came to work with us and we didn't know him very well and he didn't know us very well. And he grabbed the wrong girl.
Oh.
And so that could have gone really, really badly. So it's really important to, and I don't even know how to suggest people do this, but to vet the people that you're working with. It's volunteers, but you end up being responsible, especially if you have kids working for you. You're responsible for those kids. And it's a lot of responsibility. I really feel like in some ways we got out of the business just in time because it was getting bigger and bigger. We had like a busload of Marines come one time that were all drunk, and it's like, this is bad really quickly. And we're not professional live entertainment folks. We had some people there for security just to look like security, but they were, again, volunteers. They weren't guys with training. I think that's the main thing we learned is you've got to be super careful with the people that you associate yourself with. Sure.
And with the volunteers, did you find, as word got out from year to year, that more people would be interested in helping out, volunteering? Did you reach a point where it's like there's too many people coming out, or are you just like, I will take anyone that wants to volunteer? Awesome. Like we'll find some use for you.
In terms of crew and building and getting ready, we will take anybody. If you can paint, we'll take you. In terms of acting, we actually did start to have auditions just to see. It seems like it'd be really easy, but there's some people who like, they'll jump out and scare you and then they'll giggle. And it's like, no, that's not going to cut it. You've got to be able to stay in character. You've got to be able to commit to coming every night. It's kind of the same way, again, when I'm trying to hire somebody in the animation business. It's like, I want to meet you and make sure you're not insane. That's the main thing. Yes, you probably have talent. I can read your script, but I want to see if I can work in a room with you for the next year. And it's the same thing here. You just got to kind of feel people out. It's again, feeling people out to see if they're normal. So we did kind of limit the number who would act in it.
You mean there's like if you own less than 300 clown costumes,
there's something wrong with you.
Like 301, like, okay, now this is obviously a business. But under that, you're just creepy.
That's just a weird.
Yeah.
The clown costumes could stay, but you have to go. So
yes.
Thank you for your donation. We very much appreciate it.
Now, was it always your intent, Scott, as you guys did this, to partner with a charity?
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways it gets you a lot of people will give you a break. That if you're working for a charity, it's not, those rowdy kids making noises until 11 o'clock at night. It's like, it's an annoyance, but they're doing it for the schools. And people will volunteer, or we could get some restaurants to say, we'll give you a bunch of pizzas because it's for charity. It is, and it's nice to be able to say that, again, yes, it's a hobby. Yes, it doesn't really do anything, but we were able to do something. We were able to help some people. So it kind of helps you say, okay, that 2,000 hours I spent on that haunt, or I don't know what it is. I've never added it up, but was worth it. We did manage. A lot of people had fun, both in it and going through it. And we also were able to help. So I think we've talked since then about possibly doing more permanent things, but it's a lot harder to do, even like an escape room kind of a thing, Once it's a permanent structure, you've got all these building codes you have to abide by, and it just becomes a lot messier.
So you guys are vetting folks, and hopefully, the dependable folks that do a good job end up hopefully volunteering next year and bringing along their fellow dependable friends that kind of keep the flywheel going. Did you also have that kind of vetting from these organizations to kind of make sure that you guys are legit, that, like, hey, what you did last year, like, were they, you were talking about like production in a stage. I'm I'm thinking more like creative control. Did they ever say, hey, that theme may be too scary, or it's not in line with what we want to do? Was there anything like that?
Luckily, no.
Okay.
The third year where we were doing the parking lot, it was in the school district parking lot. And so they allowed us to use that because we were going to be giving the money to the school that we made. But they absolutely could have said, wait a minute, this is not really mental health friendly about crazy asylum people.
Sure.
Attacking people. And there were other haunts like the year before or the year after that got some flack in the press for doing that kind of theme. But we lucked out. We didn't have anybody push back on that.
Any crazy stories from the various years that you'd be willing to share that I'm assuming are past the statute of limitations for your insurance or any indemnity or liability that you had?
We had a gag where you open up a coffin that's kind of standing straight up and down, and there's a hole in the back of it, and it leads to a tunnel. And so you end up crawling through the tunnel, pitch black. You're already feeling very claustrophobic. And if there's a wall right next to you, anything could reach through and grab you. So you're feeling very vulnerable. But because it was raised up from where you went in, we had a piece of plexiglass that you climb over. And right when you're over the plexiglass, we have a light come on under the plexiglass, and there's a monster lying down right underneath you. So literally 5 inches from your face, there's a guy pounding on the plexiglass in your face. And that was one of my favorite things. But we were in that parking lot. We were right next to a retirement facility, and the screams were so loud that they kept calling the police and saying, you can't have people scream after 10 o'clock. So we tell our scare people, okay, just scare really quietly. Like, jump out at people, but don't make a lot of noise because we're going to get shut down.
Soul crushing, but just not very loud.
Yeah. Just keep it. Yes.
Did you guys have lights and music and everything that you had to kind of, deal with, turn down the volume after a certain time, and just limitations like that?
We would turn down the volume at 10. We had different, kind of soundscapes for different areas. But otherwise, no, the biggest regulation kind of thing was with the fire department, that they would come through. You can't use like black plastic or fabric that could catch fire. You have to have specially treated stuff. You have to have marked exits. You have to have a way to either turn off all the sound or turn on all the lights if people need to get out. And they were always very nice about it. But there were other people who, they'd work on a haunt for 6 months and they'd get shut down their first night because the fire department had a surprise visit and said, nope, this doesn't cut it. But we were lucky enough. We always approached them first and said, hey, please come out ahead of time, take a look, let us know if there's something we need to fix, which is, I would ask everybody to do that's going to do this kind of thing, is make friends with these guys, and they want you to be safe. So having them come out early is the best thing you can do.
I think that's why it's so fascinating, from you just kind of mentioning this kind of off the cuff in that first conversation, to then realizing that this became certainly more than a hobby for you, then evolving to being involved with fire departments and noise limitations and charities and insurance. And that's why I think this is so interesting, that something that you did for fun for yourself on your birthday kind of evolved into a business, and a business that was successful because, your heart and the hearts of other people were in this. But it's like, yeah, you did this for fun, and then it became something else. Like, that's a great story, Scott.
Yeah, it is something I'm really proud of. And it's something even just within my family that my wife helped out because we needed somebody to deal with all the actors. Towards the end, the last year, I think we had 40 to 50 actors a night, and somebody has to wrangle them and their costumes and their makeup and getting them in and making sure they're there. And so she got really involved. My kids loved it. They got really involved. And now they can tell people, what? You've never worked in a haunted house? When I was 12. And it became, again, this family thing, this community thing, that we became friends with people that lived down the street, but that we never knew. But that, like, oh yeah, I'll come, or my kid will come. It was a kind of a bonding thing that I never expected.
last year you did this, Ward 13, was that 2015 or 16?
15, yeah.
15. And you've had thoughts about maybe doing something more with this, but have you just kind of taken all 800 clown costumes and just regrouped them all in your garage and now like...
Maybe not that great, but if you came out November 1st, you'd see the yellow spots on the lawn where the tombstones were, and you'd
love
see
it.
the piles of wood with the rusty nails sticking out, and so you'd go, okay, something happened here. But I don't know, it sounds very overwhelming, but I don't know, there's something fun about it. Every year I decide, oh, this is the last year, and then by August, September, I'm like, ooh, but what if we did this? This last year in the driveway, I didn't have many helpers, so I thought I'm going to do something that doesn't require a lot of people, and I did a Halloween peep show. So it was all these walls that you went up to with like holes in them where you had to lean up and look through to see like a scene, and sometimes it was a little like diorama, sometimes it was a full-size thing with full-size characters, sometimes it was a movie in there, but that way I got the person exactly where I wanted them. So I knew they were going to be these 3 inches away from this thing. I could have something squirt at them. I could have something pop up right in front of them. I could have something touch them without having a big cast of characters. So again, it's like, well, I don't need 300 clown costumes for that. I just need to build these 10 peoples and have 10 little scenes. And so it was something that I could do basically by myself. And it's like, you can always find a way to use the amount of resources you have, whether it's people or money or props, to do something. So I think that's what's so great about it, is it's so wide open that you can always find some way to celebrate it that's fun. And people, they don't expect anything. They're here for candy. So they're like, oh my God, you've got a mask that bobs up and down on a wire? That's amazing. So they're so appreciative. It's great.
Well, I have to imagine that there's some level of, like, you are like one of the neighborhood guys, or like one of the neighborhood houses that people have to come to. I think you have a bit of a reputation at this point where it's like a destination spot on Halloween.
I don't know if people know about us. Definitely my neighbor, who's been doing it longer than I have, he gets probably 2,000 or 3,000 kids on his street, because he does it every single year. We're not that big. We get a few hundred. But I think we're probably second. I think they're like, okay, if we have time, we'll go over to Scott's house. But we'll keep competing. We're going to bring up those numbers.
You've talked about, I mean, obviously you haven't kept track of the hours that you put into these every year, and whether it's like the more staged events at, in the parking lot or at the theater, or even just for your home, are you able to, have the joy and enjoy it while it's happening? Or is it one of those things because it's so much work, like you'll after the fact, you could look back and appreciate it, or are you able to enjoy it in the moment as well?
Very hard in the midst of it for me to step back and go, this is really fun. Yeah. There are moments when I'm like, oh, it's cool. I got the mask to do this thing, and now it looks like it's a person. But yeah, it's more like looking back, like talking about it now with you guys, that I'm like, oh, that was really cool. But in the moment, it becomes like you're racing the clock. October 31st is coming, whether you're ready or not.
And it ends on your birthday too. So technically every year you get to end this on your birthday. Yeah. So there's something kind of, I don't know, something really amazing about that. But then I just imagine, having talked to you a few times and the work you've done, there has to be that other part of you that's like, oh yeah, but just wait till next year. Like when I get to pull off that one gag that I didn't do this time, that I didn't have enough time to do.
Yes, there is always that. There's always the thing you didn't quite get around to doing. So you're like, oh, but there's another year. I just don't know how many years I have left. Like, is it cool when you're 65 to be out there hanging skeletons from a tree, or is there a limit? I don't know.
There is no limit, Scott. I don't think there is.
There's a point where you should not be up on a ladder, and I don't know if that's 70 or 80.
Well, that's a different discussion of, but yeah, I think you do it as long as it's bringing you joy. I mean, clearly it's bringing joy to a lot of the people that come by, and like you said, I mean, the charity stuff, that almost seems like that's icing on the cake. I know you've said a couple of times that this is this helping anyone who's due, but clearly it does. Like even the people that are just there for the scare. I mean, I think it's a wonderful thing to have that as an option rather than go like to some of those big box. I know that they had some in Tampa, and I went to Madison Square Garden one time in New York City. Like those big things, those could be fun too. But I think there's something, with a little more of that DIY.
I think so. I don't know if sweeter is the right word, but that's when I go to other people's stuff and I'm like, oh my God, somebody took the time to build this for no other reason than just they love it. They're not going to make money off it. They're just doing it because they think it's cool to have people wander through their yard and see spooky stuff. So there's something sweet about people wanting to do that for other people. And I kind of hope that this might act as a gateway to horror for some kids, that if they've never been in a haunted house because they're too little, they can come up somebody's driveway with their mom when they're 6 and go, oh, I was a little scared, but I kind of liked it. Maybe I'm going to go to a bigger haunted house, or I'm going to start watching horror movies, or I'm going to start scaring people myself. So I think it may indoctrinate people in a very, very young age to something that I think is a lot of fun and has been a big part of my life.
Doesn't get much better, Scott. Thank you.
I'm a pusher.
As we wrap up, Scott, we should, as you promised you would, just go ahead and give everyone your home address so we can start putting it on our calendars. So, be at your driveway come October 28th.
Yes. It's South Pass. Just come by to South Pass. You'll find it.
It'll show up on Google Maps.
Yeah, you'll see it.
That's right. Everyone will know. If not,
for the sound of the screams, but
That's
just
right.
not after 10 p.m.
just not after 10.
Please, not after 10.